Are you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. Today, my guest is Hollie Hauptly, and she is the owner and the CEO of Birth Bootcamp. And I'm going to let her explain how that process worked out for her, because her own birth story was very instrumental in the progression of getting it to be the CEO and the owner of Birth Bootcamp. She is the mother of 4 children, and she is married. Interestingly, her husband is a prenatal and a pediatric chiropractor. So their lives really center around pregnancy and birth on a daily basis. And so that's a lot of fun. She loves to help her own clients, and she loves to read. And so she's just this wonderful person. And I'm so grateful that she is here today. So Hollie, tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get into being so involved with Birth Bootcamp?
So my story starts about almost 15 years ago when I was pregnant with my first. Most of us, we get pregnant and we have no idea really what we've gotten ourselves into. We just don't have any idea what's happening and all the changes to our bodies and stuff. So we were pregnant with our first. We were in an area where we didn't have any family around us or anything like that. So just trying to get support throughout the pregnancy kind of made us like branch out and be like, okay, what do we need to know? What are we doing? We're about to have a baby. Like, how do we take care of this baby? Like all the things that you don't know, you need to know. And so I was seeing some midwives, which I didn't even really understand the skills that midwives have. I had had a horrible experience with a group of OBs, and I was like, I'm never going there ever again. So we were in a small little tiny town, and my friend was like, she's like, go to these midwives. They're really great. They still deliver at the hospital, but they just take such good care of you. And I was like, all right, well, I'll try them out. And luckily the midwives were like, you need to take a childbirth class. You need to do all this stuff to like really prepare for the birth. And so we did. And so I took a birth class that was taught by a doula and just like learned all the things. And then we hired a doula super last minute in my pregnancy, and she was so instrumental in just helping me have a really amazing birth. And so the day that I gave birth to my first, like changed my life forever, because I was like, that was amazing. When can I do that again? Which is like the complete opposite of what most people think about birth. Most people think it's like this terrifying, awful, excruciating, scary experience, but I loved it. So I immediately changed professions. I was actually teaching 5th grade at the time. My last assignment for my master's degree was actually due the day he was born. And so like I was in education. So now I still use that degree. I just teach adults about birth instead of teaching kids. But yeah, so that I immediately became a doula after that. And then I started teaching classes after that. And then over the years, it was just like a quick progression of then I started training other people to do that. And then the past owner of Birth Bootcamp was like, I think I'm ready to kind of pass this on to somebody else. So, and yeah, I've been running it for 3 years now.
That's fantastic. So I have a question. What is the difference between a midwife and a doula?
That is one of the best questions, and I get it all the time. So a midwife is medically trained. They are your healthcare provider. They are making sure that you are healthy and safe throughout your pregnancy, throughout the whole entire birth process. And that's like their main responsibility is your health and safety, yours and your baby's. Whereas a doula is there to offer support to you and your partner, family, whoever, throughout the entire pregnancy. I tell my clients I'm like your personal Google. Like instead of going to look everything up on Google, just send me a message and say, hey, I need some more information about this, because then I can make sure that they're getting good quality information. But then, and helping them develop like their birth plan and what they want their birth to look like. But then everybody knows that most doulas, we go during the birth. And that's the biggest part of our support is being there on the big day as somebody who, like, I don't change shift with anybody. I am there through the whole thing, helping really with whatever it is, whether that's like you need physical support and physical comfort, or whether you need more of that mental and emotional aspect. And so we're kind of there as an extra set of hands to do really whatever it is you and your partner need. So, but
So
we
does
have
a
no medical
doula,
training.
okay, so does a doula go to the hospital too, or is that
Mhm.
mostly for home births?
We can go wherever you want. I've done
Okay.
all of it. Hospitals, that's a big misconception, is that we only
Yeah.
help people who are having natural births and we only help people who are planning an out of hospital birth. But actually, most of my clients deliver in the hospital, either with an OB or with a midwife.
So how do the OBs and midwives, are they, I just remember when I was having my children, this is, 20 years ago, that it just seemed like they didn't want those, they didn't want doulas or even midwives
Mm-hmm.
around. So has
Mm-hmm.
that changed in the hospital setting?
In some, and not in all of them, and not in all areas either. So most of them are definitely more welcoming to have somebody there, but we're like, it's a, I call birth, it's, well, let's see here. How should I say this? I want to say a team sport. It is, but it isn't, because you kind of want like an all hands on deck to have everybody there to support you, but it is also a very intimate time. So not necessarily everybody, but especially in the hospital, providers and nurses usually have multiple patients. And
Hmm.
so they're not in there, they're not able to offer that hands-on, physical support that you need. And that there's a lot of it that you miss out on, of that mental and emotional aspect of it. Like, there's a lot to be said to having a woman in the room who can be empathetic to what you're experiencing, and can kind of help you navigate that whole experience and know what's going on, versus they're just kind of in and out, things like that. So,
Right, and having an interpreter, like
yes.
to
Mm-hmm.
explain the medical jargon,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I kind of feel like I missed out because I look at I had a great OB for my second two. My first one, my we had just barely moved and I was 6 months pregnant, so it was just kind of, it was what it was. And so I didn't know the doctor very well. And then the day of, he was out of town, and so I had somebody totally new, and so there was nobody there for me to really connect with, and that was really difficult for me. So
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm curious, as a doula, what is your interaction with the partner?
So it really depends on what they want their experience to be like too. And so it's kind of tailored to them. So some partners want to be the hands-on. And so they're like, I want to be the one offering the massage, or offering, the counter pressure, or helping her with different positions. And so then I'm more of a guide for them to just be like, okay, this is where a good place where lots of moms like pressure, or maybe put some pressure here on her low back. And so I won't be doing a lot of that. I'll be helping them do it. Whereas some
Got it.
partners kind of want to be more of like, can I just stand next to her bed, because they're freaked out about everything that's going to happen. and so
Right.
and so then sometimes I'm more hands-on doing that kind of stuff while they're offering, like they're talking to her, they're, more there for that mental and emotional support too. So really just, it's so dependent on what they want. That is a big misconception as well, is that they think we're just going to come over or come in and take over, and the partners are going to have nothing to do. And
Right.
usually it's the exact opposite, because they feel like they have support too. So that actually gives them confidence to like get in there and do something and be an active participant in this too. And so usually they actually end up doing a lot more than they thought they would.
That's really amazing. So on that count, I wish that I'd had somebody like you too, because my husband really struggled with the whole support. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that was kind of an interesting experience for me. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Even my husband, he was like, we don't hire the doula for you. He's like, the doula is to help me.
right.
Like, so, because with my fourth, we were like, do we need to hire a doula? And I was, we kind of went back and forth. And I was like, it's our fourth baby. We've done this a few times. We know what we're doing. But he was like, heck yeah, we are. So,
So he saw the value of that too. That's
mm-hmm.
really
Oh, yeah.
awesome.
Yep.
And you're, I'm sure, far into your own, being
Mm-hmm.
a doula and all that
Oh, yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So
I had been doing it for years by then.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome. Okay, so you've talked about sitting down with the couple and or the mom and having a talk about a plan. So can you go through like what is a good plan and what should we consider putting in that
mhm.
plan for a birth plan?
Well, they're so individual for every person, and so every birth plan looks a little different. Before somebody can even write a birth plan, though, they have to learn about what all of their options are and what is available to them in order to make decisions.
Right.
So they need a very good comprehensive childbirth class so they even know what they could possibly put on there. Um, there is a common quote out there of if you don't know your options, you don't have any. And that is very much so
I
in
agree.
birth. If you don't know that you can, maybe labor in the shower or get up and walk around, or you can say yes and no to certain things that they offer you, like then you don't really have those options available to you. You're just doing what they tell you.
Right.
So that's like the first step is they need to take a birth class and they need to sit down with their partner and say, okay, these are things we want on here. And these are things that are really important to us, and some people have really strong feelings about um, whether they want an IV or not, or whether they want the monitoring that monitors their contractions and the baby's heart rate. Like, and there's so many different options available to do that different ways. Um, so there's just different things like that. Do they want to use different positions? Do they even want to use pain medication? Um, but they have to take a class. They have to learn all of that stuff. Then they decide and then they write it down. So,
So when you're talking about taking a class, so I just remember I did a Lamaze class.
mm-hmm,
Um, but that was pretty much it.
mm-hmm.
What I imagine what you're talking about is totally different, correct?
It depends. So a lot of people can kind of get mad at me when I say this, but I do not recommend taking a class at the hospital. Because those classes are more telling you how to be a good patient. And this, it's kind of like, come in, check in, this is what's going to happen, and this is what we're going to do. They don't really share with you all of your options.
Right.
They're kind of just sharing, these are our policies, this is how we work.
Well, but that makes
Um,
sense because they're a business,
right.
right? And so,
Hospitals are
right. So,
businesses.
yeah, yeah,
Yep. Yeah. So you really want to find an independent, somebody who's independent from that, who doesn't have a bias, who is just like, these are all of your options. These are all the facts. These are the pros, cons, things like that. Like when people come into one of my classes, I'm like, I don't necessarily care what kind of birth you choose to have. What matters to me is that you feel like you have the information that you needed to make decisions that are best for you and your baby, and that you feel supported in those. Um, so it's not necessarily the type of birth that matters. They actually have studies where they had asked women, when they're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they were like, well, tell us about your birth. What do you remember about your birth? And they couldn't remember the nitty gritty details, but they always remembered like how they were treated, how they were talked to, how they were made to feel. That's what's important. And those are the long standing things that stuck with women. And so that's what's important to me, is that that's how they feel. They feel great about their birth no matter what kind of birth it was.
that's awesome. I love that. Okay, so what you were telling me about, there's like five things that you need to consider. So can
Mm-hmm.
you go over those with us?
Okay, so we have our list of 5 things everyone who is pregnant that they should do to prepare for their birth. So the first one is choosing the right care provider for you. Um, that and number 2 is choosing the right place to give birth. Those 2 things will have the biggest influence on the type of birth that you want and get. So if you are really wanting a more natural experience, is choosing an OB who performs a lot of C-sections. I don't know that they're the best fit for that.
Right.
Whereas, somebody who wants an epidural, a midwife and a birth center is not the right choice. So it's figuring out what you want and making sure you have a provider who lines up with that. And that they do that often. It's not a big deal. So those are the first 2 things. And typically, most people, they just look at their list of providers on their insurance list. And they're like,
Right.
hey,
Who's
that one's
closest to my
right.
house,
That one's
right?
close to my
Yeah.
house. I'll go to that one. That's like the worst way to find a care provider. So, and if you, a lot of people are afraid to like switch. They're like, I don't really like my doctor, but they feel kind of stuck. And so I'm like, if you don't like your OB or your midwife, go find a different one. Like, go talk to, if you talk to other doulas and childbirth educators in your area, because they can probably give you the names of the ones that they work with on a regular basis who provide really great care. So don't be afraid to like switch. So that's our first two, is finding the right care provider and birthplace. So whether that's a hospital, a birth center, or at home. So all of those are great options. There's not one that's better than the other. They just all have different things that you have to consider. Then number 3 is taking the birth class. Obviously, number 4 is hiring the doula that we've talked about. And then number 5 surprises a lot of people, but that is seeing a prenatal chiropractor. Those are
Oh, I
our
totally
top
agree
5
with
things.
this.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I absolutely 100% agree about that. My first birth took 27 hours, my second 7, because I had discovered within that time the
Mm-hmm.
prenatal chiropractic. And so I
Yep.
had myself adjusted right before. And then my last was 2 hours. But again, and I so I thought I've always thought, if I had had more, I would have been dangerous. Because
Yeah.
it went so fast. But but yeah, what a difference the chiropractic
Mm-hmm.
made on me. I mean, it was
Oh
just
yeah.
amazing. Well, and then typically you get, a prenatal chiropractor will typically do newborn
Yes.
chiropractic too.
Yes.
And
Most of them will do that
I
with
think
babies.
that's really important as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
so tell me, in your opinion, why that chiropractic is so important.
So I have just seen it, like my clients that have chiropractic care versus my clients that don't. Um, I can see huge differences in, if their baby can be in the best position possible for birth, it's going to make your birth faster, easier, less painful. And who wouldn't sign up for that? Like,
Right.
um, so their chiropractic can work to really make it so that your body can function at an optimal state. And so that helps you throughout your entire pregnancy, but then also especially for the birth, as babies trying to get into a good position for birth, and your pelvis, and the way that your nervous system is communicating with your
Hmm.
uterus and all that stuff. Like, it's just so important.
I just found that I felt like my babies were happier when I was more aligned. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was able to move around
Yeah,
and
they
they were
feel like
able
they
to
have the
move around.
space. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. I didn't even know what your 5 were. So I'm so happy that you
Yep.
said chiropractic
Yep.
care because I that it made a huge, huge difference for me. So,
Yep.
okay. So let's talk about postpartum because I feel like this part of the birthing process gets really looked over a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And unless it's like some extreme story where mom had massive postpartum depression and went off the rail, right?
Right.
Um, Other than that, you don't really hear about it a whole lot. So talk to me a little bit about, why do you think that part gets so overlooked and what do you think we can do about it?
Well, I mean, and that's the question, is why do we overlook it? Like, it doesn't make sense to me that we do. But it's kind of one of those topics that like we don't ever talk about. And I think that a lot of women feel shame if they say, "Hey, I'm struggling because we just had a baby. This is supposed to be exciting. It's new. Like, we wanted this." But then we find, "Oh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be." And so a lot of women feel like they shouldn't talk about that because they feel like it's something they're supposed to be happy about. I mean, and I was the same. I Postpartum with my first was way harder than I thought it was going to be. I had no idea. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. I had worked with infants for years and years and years because my first certification was in early childhood. And so I was like, I know how to take care of babies. Like, no big deal. But no, I had no idea what changes my body was going to be going through, what mentally I was going to be going through. And I think that that's just something it's so hard to convey to new parents as well, of like, okay, this is what's coming, because they're like, yeah, right, that won't happen to me.
Right.
So,
I mean, you have these rose-colored glasses of, oh, it's going to be so amazing.
mhm,
And my my first experience with postpartum, it was actually really horrendous. Like it was so
mhm,
bad. I went into the birth sick. Like I just had a cold, but I
uh-huh.
could not get well. Like I got pink eye, I got laryngitis, I had the flu. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
and I had
awful.
mastitis for 4.5 months.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so on top, like I was just a physical mess, and I
Mhm.
felt bad because I'm trying to nurse, and meanwhile I just want to stab my breasts because they are so engorged and tight, and there was nothing that I could do about it.
Wow.
And and then on top of that, all these other physical issues
Mhm.
that I was having. And my poor little girl was, 4 months, and I was just an absolute wreck. And I would just cry all the time because I just hurt. I hurt all the time.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was failing as a mom because I couldn't do it, quote unquote, right,
Right. Mhm.
and really had very little support,
Yeah.
and I finally got to a point where I was just like, I can't. It's either it's either me or, I've got to either stop nursing or
Mhm.
I've got to, really it became that was the only solution
Right.
because I went
Right.
on the antibiotics and
Yeah.
immediately after I got off, the mastitis came back and I just could not kick it.
Wow.
And so I went cold turkey, which
Mhm.
was really hard and
Yep.
super, super painful. But I was
Yep.
like, I'm already in pain.
Right. And you're like, I'm
What's
just
the difference?
done. Mhm.
Yeah. And so, had I had somebody to guide me along that I could have called and said, I don't know what to do. I'm
Mhm.
failing at this. How can I? And my daughter was really difficult too. Like she was a screamer and was so I can't even tell you
Mhm.
how hard that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish that I had had somebody that I could just confide in, and just go, I don't
Mhm.
know what to do.
Yeah, you needed
So
a postpartum doula.
I did, but I didn't know that existed.
No, back then that wasn't a very common thing. And even still, while it's becoming more popular, it's still very much it, people look at it as a luxury, you know, which I understand that it is an expense, but having that support, and we used to live kind of in, and we have that village mindset of like, and it takes a village to raise a kid, and we had family and friends and community, but we've lost that. Like we don't have
Yeah.
that anymore. Most of us don't live near family, and there's very much this mentality of like we've got to be able to do it all on our own, and it's so unrealistic, and it has made life harder for so many families. Um, and so, back then we would have had help from all sorts of people to come and do that. But now we just don't have that. Like maybe some friends will bring us some meals, but other than that, a lot of people really stick it out on their own. And I'm like, you do not have to do that. Um, I there are a ton of resources out there for families that just a lot of people don't know about. So whether it is somebody like a postpartum doula, but also finding like really good lactation consultants to help with things like that. It's easy to like make meal trains. There's so many different types of like therapists now. There's therapists that specialize in like postpartum depression and anxiety and all that stuff. Like there's so much out there, but it's trying to find all of that stuff. So like I tell all the doulas I train that I'm like, you need to know what resources are in your community so that when your clients need them, you can help them get the help that they need.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing. Yeah, I think my experience would have been totally different had I just had somebody say, "Hey, all you need to do is get a medical grade breast pump." Because that's what I did the second time, and it
mhm.
totally
Changed
changed my
everything.
experience.
Wow.
Totally. And but that's all that I need. But you just don't know what you don't know. And so
Hmm.
I love that you're training your doulas to not only do what, their job, but also to know what resources are in the community. That's
Yeah.
that's really amazing.
Yeah. Other than being at the birth, that's one of the biggest ways that my clients use me is they're like, I need, a chiropractor, or I need a massage therapist, or I need this person who's good, and so they always want recommendations for all those different things. So,
Right, like who's vetted, like who's going to
hmm
listen to me? Like this
yep.
is what I'm, and that was one of my biggest complaints is I just felt like people didn't listen to what I
hmm
wanted. And
Yeah.
you know, part of that was I just again I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, you know, anyway,
Yeah.
um, it's also learning to speak up for yourself as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But
I
but I
find
think
that that
that's
happens a lot with first babies.
yes,
I was the same
absolutely.
way. Yep.
Absolutely. But a doula would help you navigate that and say, hey, well, have you
hmm
considered this? Well, no, right?
Right. Right. And even sometimes just somebody saying, you know what, it's normal to feel like this is really hard. And that's
Yeah.
okay. We spend in one of our classes that we teach, we spend hours, talking about like what's your postpartum recovery is going to be like, what to expect, knowing that it's okay if you feel like this isn't the best time in your life, or you're going to probably go back and forth between the two. You'll be
Right.
1 minute, you'll be like, this is great. I love my baby. And the next minute you're bawling and you really don't have any idea why, like sometimes I think just knowing that that's okay to feel that way and to have both emotions makes it easier just knowing that.
Right.
So
Right. That's really amazing. So is it the same person? Is the postpartum doula the same one as the prenatal doula?
it can be if that doula does both, then sometimes it is. I know many doulas who they do it both because like they've, it's like you've been with them during like the most intimate time of their life at their birth. So it's kind of like a natural expansion to then have them in your home helping you postpartum.
Right.
But I do know some doulas who they just really want to focus on the birth, and I know some doulas who they just want to focus on postpartum. So it kind of depends on who you hire.
Okay. That's again, it's knowing that you have options, right?
Yep.
And being able to um go with that. So that's
Yep.
really, really awesome. Very cool. Okay, I'm curious, do you I've got a lot of friends now who and honestly they're really more like my kids' ages now, but
hmm
who do a lot of home births. So do you think that is on the rise more than the hospital births? Like what's your perception of that?
We saw a huge jump in the number of out of hospital births during COVID. And there were rates of home births and birth center births probably higher than ever before because a lot of people were like, oh, we just don't want to deal with the hospital.
That's
But
understandable. Yeah.
right, yeah. And so we saw a big jump for that. But I think it just is becoming more like people are understanding that like this, like for healthy, low risk women, an out of hospital birth is a safe option.
Yeah.
There's so many myths out there about how dangerous it is and how like all these things can happen. But like the studies have all shown that if you are healthy, you don't have any complications, you don't have, just different things, then it's safe to do it outside of the hospital with a qualified provider, and a lot of people think, oh, you're just doing it at home with somebody who has no idea, but like midwives usually have years and years of training. um,
Right.
and they know like those red flags to look for, and they generally will not hesitate to transfer you to the hospital if you need it. But yeah, I definitely think they're on the rise. We also, I think more celebrities are doing it. And so that's like helps kind of like more people hear about it and go,
Right.
that's a thing. Like you do that.
Right.
So, cause like
Well,
Hillary Duff
and you're
just
like,
had
yeah,
her
for
home birth
millennia,
and
right?
yeah.
Like this
Yep.
is how it was done for, all time.
Right. So
Well,
yeah,
and
they're
that's really
definitely
an
on the rise.
interesting, yeah, it's an interesting thing because like when I was birthing my babies, it was like if you do a home birth, that's super dangerous. Like, and it was
Right.
like they pound that into you, and
hmm
so I just think it's super cool that there are lots of options. And now I see these women who are like have these wonderful experiences,
Yeah.
at home. So I just think it's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, hospitals are businesses. Um, they would rather them deliver their babies there. And so they do. And in I forget which decade it was, but when hospital kind of moved to, or when birth moved to the hospital, like we kind of went from doing it at home to doing it in the hospital. And now we're seeing this shift away from it again. But they did this like big smear campaign for midwives. And they were like, midwives don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. They're dirty. They're, so they're unsanitary, like all these things. And so that's when like midwifery kind of was gone. But it has been over the last couple of decades just been coming back. And we now have, more midwives. We need tons more midwives. But and they, doctors and hospitals, like they only see the emergencies. Like, so of course they think home birth is dangerous, but they also don't see the thousands of other home births that are done every day across the United States that they're perfectly fine and healthy. So of course they think it's dangerous because they're like, well, you're just going to transfer anyways.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the number one reason for a mom to transfer from an out of hospital birth to a hospital is exhaustion. Not that anything's wrong.
Really?
It's that it's been a long, hard labor and she needs some rest. And an epidural is a great option for that.
Right.
So it's not that anything has gone wrong.
But again, that's the education part and knowing where your point is, of what you need to do. So and let's talk about that. Like I want to talk about like the education of it, because you get very little education, right? Obviously you've got the birth class, but that you talk about, but what about, how else can women be educated? Like, even if it's for you or if it's for, a daughter, like in my case where my kids are older, how can we educate women greater about this?
I think it starts with just talking about it because we have a complete lack of understanding of even just like female anatomy and how the female body works. Like it's been such a taboo subject. And, it was kind of always one of those like, hush, hush, you don't talk about those types of things. And
Absolutely.
but we do see this generation of people who are like, okay, that's ridiculous. That did nobody any service. And we have all these women who just really have no idea how their body works. And so I think it starts with just talking to our daughters about it. Like my daughter's 12 now, and like she is very versed on how her body works, and knows all that stuff. And so I think that's the first step. But then, I mean, I think it's easier with social media now, with podcasts, with books, but the hard part is making sure it's somebody who knows what they're talking about. Because just anybody can say anything on social media. But that's one thing. I just started a class last night with a couple and they were like, hey, what else can we do, to get ready? And I was like, well, guess what? I give you homework every single week. And I tell them, I'm like, these are books that I recommend. Like I have a huge bookshelf actually just right next to me here, just full of books that are just really great resources. And finding blogs and podcasts and things like that, just that are from good quality sources. That's the hard part. People always get mad at me when I say like that standard book, that what to expect when you're expecting.
Oh yes.
Throw it in the trash. like that book has induced more fear in people than anything I've ever seen before. Like it's the same mentality of like birth is dangerous and it's risky and all that stuff. I'm like, if that were the case, the human species would have died out a long time ago. Like our bodies are built to give birth to our babies, and usually it will work and happen just fine without any complications until you start messing with things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, so I'm curious, what are some of your favorite books that you recommend?
So one of my favorite authors, her name is Henci Goer. She's amazing. She's written quite a few books. The first one of hers that I read was called The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth. It's a little bit older, but it's still totally applicable. And it's a very easy read because she's like, okay, IVs during birth. Here's your pros. Here's your cons. Like this is
that's awesome. So she just lays it all out.
Yes, and like some of her pages are literally bulleted lists. So it's a very easy way to kind of get the information. She's also just recently started writing a whole series. She finished the first one. It's just called Labor Pain, and it's all about the pain of labor because that's what everybody's worried about, right? Like, isn't birth going to be painful? And I'm like, I don't call it painful. I like to use other words. I'm like, it's intense. there's, there's some discomfort with it, but everybody thinks it's this painful, awful experience. We equate pain with bad. Like usually if we experience
Yeah.
pain, it's a bad thing. We're hurt, we're injured, we're sick. Whereas the pain that we experience with birth is actually like a physiological, like it's a normal part of the process. So we have to change our mindset about that. So her book about that, just called Labor Pain, is great. I'm like, what are some of my other favorites? There's one called Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering that is absolutely awesome. There are so many. I can't pick a ton. So
Well, that will at least give our listeners a place
I
to go
can
to. And
I can send you a list too, and you can put them in the show notes.
oh, that would be wonderful. I will totally do that. That'd be
Yeah.
fantastic. And so that's great. So, okay, I want to, and I'm assuming that a lot of those books would, talk about the postpartum stuff too, correct?
Most of them do, yes, because it's all tied
Okay.
in together. It's all one thing.
Well, and it is, but I don't think that's really how people think of it,
Mm-hmm. They think I
And so
have to
I
get
think
through
that's the
this one
biggest,
day. I have to get through this
yeah,
birth on this one day. And I'm like, but your postpartum is so much longer than that.
yeah.
So, yeah.
How long do you think it actually takes, like on average?
So, new doctors are now saying that you were postpartum for 10 years.
What?
Yep. Yeah,
Why?
like everybody thinks like there's your typical 6 weeks, and everybody's
Right,
excited because they think they can begin sexual activities again at 6 weeks. But most
right,
women aren't even ready then. They're like, don't touch me.
right.
So then they were kind of saying like, okay, 6 months, you're postpartum for a year, but then it's gotten extended more. The more they learn about postpartum and how pregnancy and birth affects a woman's body, her brain, everything, it's years before women, they're back to whatever they were before, which I don't think you ever really go back. you're
Yeah,
you're
I
totally
would agree with that.
changed after you have children.
Yeah.
So
So how
um
does that work? Because you don't wait 10 years, to
right.
have other children. So how does that work? I mean, we know how it works, but like, what are they saying the implications are of postpartum with, having other children when you're in the middle of that?
There's a lot of talk about like postpartum depletion right now. I feel like that's becoming a more popular topic of like finding out, like really looking at where you are nutritionally, because it really does. It drains your body of all of these nutrients because it's all being used up, whether you're pregnant, whether you're breastfeeding. And so there's a lot of talk right now about figuring that out and, kind of being like, hey, you're really low on XYZ, and, using either supplements or food, trying to figure out that. There's also a lot of talk right now about sleep. Most of us do not get a lot of sleep, and we know that sleep really affects us, and it will affect us for the rest of our lives. Um, so I think it's an area that we don't necessarily know all the implications yet. Because yeah, you're right. We don't wait years and years and years. I mean, some people do, but most, families, they want to have their kids while they're young. And so they're having, kids that are 1, 2, 3, 4 years apart. Um, so I think a lot of it does go down to nutritionally, though, like you're making sure you're getting all those essential nutrients that you need and building your body back up after pregnancy and breastfeeding. So it's hard on your body. I won't deny that.
It is. And I feel like I need to complete my story because I had such a horrible first experience. But by the time I got to my third, I was up and I was ready to go after a
Mm-hmm.
week. I was had zero problems, and so
Yeah.
that was an interesting and very exciting time when I was like, hey, I can move around, right? And being a mom to three, then I was grateful. I was grateful my
Mm-hmm.
bad experience was on number one, but I wish that I'd had the education and the support to help me
Right.
through that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That makes sense.
awesome. Well, that's super fantastic. So, in your like, what are some of the common struggles that you find that women have throughout the process?
I think the first thing is I think that there's just a Like a lack of confidence. Because throughout our entire lives growing up, even like as children, as teenagers, and as young women, like birth is not seen as this amazing thing. Like I was saying, like media makes it look scary and makes it
Mhm.
look traumatic. And so I think there's a lot of that lack of confidence of like, what am I about to do?
Yeah,
Like everybody's like, we want kids, we want to get pregnant, but then it's very daunting thinking about that birth. Um, and so that goes back to like doing lots of work to learn about everything. Um, I know there is a big struggle with, like I talk about finding the care provider. It's hard. I won't say it's easy, because now with the way that our health system is in the United States and insurance, like it's expensive to have a baby. And so
it is.
whether you're paying a doctor and you have insurance, or you're paying out of pocket, or you're paying a midwife, like that's another big thing. So they feel like they are limited to what their options are for that, depending on their financial situation and their insurance and things like that. And I totally get it. Like I've been there. Um, and so that's another, I don't know, concern, that
Well,
is,
because
is a problem
doulas,
for a lot of people.
they're not really, you can't go through insurance for doula, right?
No, not yet.
And can
We
you
we
for
are
a
making
midwife?
progress.
Okay.
So the midwife, it depends on the state. Like it depends on your insurance company. It depends on your state. It depends on what kind of licensing your midwife has. Um, we're seeing more and more coverage for midwives, but there are still lots that um, they won't cover it. You have to pay it out of pocket.
And so does the doula's fees, like, are there like different types of packages that you can pay for
Uh-huh.
with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
every doula is different. We all kind of have our own set packages, and pricing and stuff. And there is a huge range of pricing for doulas. Um, when I first started out as a doula, the average price was about $300, but now you can see anywhere of a range from like 600 upwards of $2,000.
Wow, that is a
So
big difference.
yeah, so it's an investment though. I look at birth too as like this is supposed to be one of the most important days of your life. It's going to be a day that you will remember forever. It's going to affect you physically, mentally, and emotionally. Like it is worth investing some time and energy into preparing for it. And we put tens of thousands of dollars towards a wedding, but people aren't willing to invest that towards a birth, which I find interesting.
That's a really good point. A
Yep.
super good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
And this
those
is
are
your
supposed to
child,
be like the two most important days of your life,
right?
your wedding and the day you have your baby. But yeah, we are in two different schools of thought there of, yeah, we're going to do all of this work to make this amazing wedding day, but I'm not going to do it for the day I give birth. So,
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's pretty crazy, isn't it? So, okay, so what are some golden nuggets that you have for people who are maybe thinking about a doula or kind of they're in that process? Like, what are some of the things that you advise?
um, I don't know. I think,
Get a doula, right?
right, hire a doula.
Right.
Take a class and hire a doula. Like those are like do those two things, because then that's going to help you fill in all the other things. That's going
Right.
to make the rest of everything else easier. If you need to find a different provider, change your birth location, or even if you just are struggling and you feel like crap during your pregnancy, like you've got a good childbirth class that's going to help you know like how to eat throughout your pregnancy to help you feel better. Like, and so those two things really will help you kind of figure everything else out because you'll have that support there that you need. Um,
Wonderful.
yeah. So a lot of people ask me about like how do I hire a doula? How do I even find one? I mean, Google's easy. There are lots of like directories online where doulas can be listed. A lot of states or large metropolitan areas will have listings for doulas and stuff too, but a lot of them offer complimentary consultations. And so you can go and meet with them, ask them a bunch of questions, talk to them, kind of see if you feel like they're a good fit for you, and then you can kind of choose what you want. So that's what I recommend. Like meet a few, really get to know them. Make sure that you find one that like you feel like will offer the support that you need. And a lot of people will ask the questions, how many births have you been to? What's your training like? Kind of the more technical, logistical ones. But I'm like, even
Mhm.
more important than that is, do you feel comfortable with them? Do you feel like your personalities are going to mesh well together? Things like that, because it could only be their fifth birth, but they're like the most amazing doula for you.
Right.
So yeah, don't
That
be
is really
afraid to
great
interview.
advice. Well, and you do offer classes through
Hmm.
Birth Boot Camp. So are they online or in person?
So we have both. So we have online, anybody can take them anytime. They can sign up and work through those. And there's a couple of different options depending on kind of what you're hoping for. But then we do have instructors teaching in-person classes. And we're not in all 50 states yet, but that's my goal is that we're to all 50 states. We have classes going on all over the place. A lot of our instructors will also offer kind of like a hybrid where you're kind of watching our online classes, but you're still getting support from like an instructor who can kind of answer your questions and things like that. So
Oh,
like
cool.
we have something to like meet everybody's needs. So
That's awesome. Okay, so where can people find out about, what you do, your classes and hiring a doula and all that stuff through your site?
the easiest place is just birthbootcamp.com. So if you search Birth Boot Camp, will pop up. And so for the online classes, it's super easy to get to. But then we also have a directory for all the doulas that we've trained and for people teaching in-person classes. So you can get on there and see if you have somebody in your area.
Fantastic.
So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, and you have a special guest for our listeners. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we have we call it our birth plan blueprint, kind of going back to when we were talking about writing that plan of like, how do I even put this together? And so you can download that and that walks you through step by step, things to include. How do I even begin thinking about writing this? So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, wonderful. And I will put the link to that in the show notes as well. And if you send me that list of books, I will put
Yes, I
that
will.
there. Awesome. Thank you so much, Holly. This has been
Yep.
super informative. I honestly wish that I had known you 20 years ago and that you were doing what you're doing now 20 years ago. Because I
Yeah.
think I think it would have totally changed my experience, at least for my first one.
Hmm.
And it rather than looking back and going, oh, what a horrible experience that was, I could have said, oh, I loved it. Because I
Yeah.
didn't. I didn't. And
Yeah.
it was hard. So anyway,
Yep.
so hopefully people can learn from my mistakes and hire somebody like you. So
Yeah.
wonderful.
Get the help you
Thank
need.
you. Yep, absolutely. Because we're important and we deserve it, right?
Yep.
We spent all
Absolutely.
that time building creating a baby and
Hmm.
we need that support too. So wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It has
Yeah.
been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. We hear so much of the time how important it is to do self-care and to take care of your body. And yet I feel like, at least in my own experience, that was not as emphasized. And again, I know that that was 20 some years ago, but I think it's so important to look at your health no matter what phase of life you are in. And if there is somebody out there that can help you in that phase to really get the most out of life and the experiences that you're having, then boy, do it. Get that help and get that support that you need. I really truly wish that I had had that support when I had my oldest child and love her to death. But boy, that was a really tough time in my own life. And I would really love to prevent that kind of an experience in other people. So learn about doulas and midwives and get all of the information that you can about having that birthing experience, not just the prenatal experience and the delivery, but also that postpartum experience, because that is super, super important. And I realize that my audience this may not pertain to you, but I bet you that you know somebody that it does pertain to, and you can be that source of information to help them. And let's build each other up, and let's create, that village where we can help each other any way that we can. I hope that you have found some benefit to this podcast, and please share it with those that you know that could use this information. And until next time, know that your purpose is in your story. Just like Hollie's story led to her purpose, yours can do the same. Until next time, take care.
Celebrate your dreams, let them take flight, for you are a star, shining bright in every step you take. Let your